All right. Well, I guess let's get after it. We got 30 minutes here to learn about some turf care with our guest, Travis Hogan. I'll let you introduce yourself. Tell us who you are or what you do.
My name's Travis Hogan. I'm the head groundskeeper for the Kansas City Chiefs. So we maintain landscaping around the fields, offices. We've got 5 natural grass fields. Actually, hold on. We got 6 natural grass fields we maintain and 1 synthetic.
Very cool. So tell us, I don't know, maybe a quick version of the story, how you got there. Where'd you start? What led to you being in the position you're at right now?
The fastest version I've got is I started in this business when I was 19, working a golf course, and a guy I worked with there ended up getting an assistant superintendent job at Black Wolf Run in Kohler, Wisconsin for the Women's U.S. Open in 1998. And each assistant got to hire an intern. So he called, asked if I wanted to do it. I said, yeah. So I went up there, was there for, 9 months or so, had heard that the Chiefs were looking for someone to finish the season. So the week of Thanksgiving, I moved from Wisconsin to Kansas City, finished the season with the Chiefs, and then went to school at Rutgers in New Jersey, came back to the Chiefs, back to Rutgers, back to the Chiefs, and then left the Chiefs in 2002 to go to Pebble Beach for 3 years. Was at Pebble for 9 months, Spyglass for 1.5 years, 2 years, and then came back to Missouri as a golf course superintendent. Was a superintendent for 5 years, and then came back to the Chiefs in 2010 and took over in 2016.
That's a resume right there. Like Pebble Beach and Spyglass. Look at you over here. So this is exciting to get to pick your brain a little bit.
It depends on the day of how much you get to pick.
Yeah. If it's not fried already. Well, hopefully today you're fresh and ready to go. No, I know you've probably been busy at it, but man, let's start with what do you got going on in the field? What's on the Kansas City Chiefs field right now?
Currently, we just took grow tarps off today and grow lights. We mowed it. We'll mow it again tomorrow. Probably spray it, and then put the grow light out, one grow light out for the rest of the week. Kind of bounce around. Probably get it off on Friday. We'll paint the field Thursday, Friday. We've got the Dallas Cowboys coming into town Sunday, and then we're off the week of Thanksgiving, and then we have back-to-back. So this will be 5 games in 7 weeks. So it's been pretty hectic.
And then the grass type?
It is Northbridge, Bermuda, and then we're overseeded to perennial rye and chewings fescue. Then we've also got some straight chewings out there, and then we also have some tetraploid rye out there as well.
Gotcha.
So we got a Heinz 57 going.
Hey, it looks great. The sod. So Spin was telling me, he gave me a little bit of a heads up on when you're resodding your field. Resod every year, and correct me if that's incorrect, but and then tell us what the process is like when you're doing that, as far as where it's grown, something about plastic, and you can elaborate from there.
Yeah, it just depends on, what the events are the previous year, where we stand. I mean, this year we had Monster Jam in June. That pretty much kills the whole field. And then we had Garth Brooks in August. So we basically just let it ride through the summer, and then had Garth. As soon as Garth got out, then, you strip it down. Like last year, we sodded for the playoffs. So at that point, we had phrase mowed and sprigged the stadium field for 2020 with COVID, not really knowing if we're going to have a season. So we basically laid grass on top of grass last year down the middle. So when we cut out for the playoffs, we couldn't get everything out. You don't have time to go all the way to sand and then replace sand and get it settled and smooth. So we basically laid grass on top of grass, kind of like putting, new brake pads on really crappy rotors. So we had to get all that out this year. So we had to go down probably 2.5 inches to get everything out, get back to sand. We had to add a little bit of sand and get everything laser graded back out where we wanted it. And then the grass that we use is from Carolina Green. It's their Game On grass, where they grow it on plastic for probably 8 months or so. and it comes in about 1.5 inches thick. So you're basically just laying giant slabs of grass down. They're 3.5-foot wide rolls by 45 feet, and then there's a machine that kind of pushes them together. Then we put a 3-ton roller on it to lock everything in. So we've laid that up to as late as Friday before a game on Sunday and played on it. So
wow. Yeah, that process amazes me. I hear about you guys doing that all the time, and then emergency situations where before the Super Bowl or whatever, people have resodded right before, and then it gets played on just a day or two later or something nuts. But pretty cool.
It's pretty crazy when it you never know what you have until they get a cleat in it. So I'm always a little bit nervous until once we get through warm-ups and we start to play a little bit of the first quarter, and you kind of see that everything's going to be all right. You can kind of chill out a little bit.
Travis, on Bermuda growing on plastic, can you explain the process? Okay, so the sod farm has sod. What do? They flip it over and wash the soil off of it, stick it on the plastic, and just start top dressing sand? How does that work?
I haven't actually obviously seen the exact way that Carolina Green does it, but their actual farm that they get the thin cut from is a pretty sandy soil. So they basically just cut it there, roll it up, drive it up to the farm in North Carolina, and you're basically laying it on clay or a parking lot, or it's a very, very, very hard surface that's graded and smooth. Then they put plastic down over this entire field and then lay thin cut on top of it. They have in-ground irrigation, and then they start to top dress it with a kind of a sandy mix. I don't know that it's straight sand. I don't think you would be quite as tight. I think my guess would be they have a specially designed top dress mix that they use, and they just keep top dressing it and growing it and get it to what thickness they feel like is the best, and cut it and send it.
So once they harvest it, they don't use a Magnum or anything like a regular traditional soil cutter harvester, right? Because the blades are, if it's on concrete, right? Or do they stay above the plastic?
Yeah, I would have to think that you're using something similar to a disc for a field on each side and set 42 inches and just cutting it kind of like a knife, kind of like a pizza cutter. You're basically using a pizza cutter on each side, set at 42 inches. To cut that.
That's crazy. And the stuff that goes, like, nobody knows all the behind the scenes and like how this all actually works. People just turn on their TV and watch football every week and just, I guess, appreciate that the field is there, and then that's about all the thought that goes into it. I was going to ask you about plant growth regulator. I know that I've actually asked you this before on the Discord, just like in the chat, talked a little bit about that, but I guess you could kind of go over maybe some of your philosophies on it, just sort of the general overview, and then we can get a little bit deeper into plant growth regulator after that.
Plant growth regulator is used for years, especially in golf. You're using it everything from, we used it at Pebble to shut down tees, fairways, even greens a little bit. For big tournaments, you're trying to maintain speed, and you're also trying to eliminate clippings. You don't want the first tee time at 7 a.m. to go off and they've got clippings all over their ball. So, all your work is a month ahead of, 4 to 6 weeks ahead of a tournament is where all the work goes in. And then as you get closer to tournament time, you're trying to shut the whole golf course down, with growth regulator. So the philosophy kind of for the sports turf side is, we do a lot of testing, and we're kind of fortunate where we have our training camp fields are about 65 miles north of Kansas City, and we don't have any traffic on those from really. The school uses them a little bit, maybe in the fall, but they really don't use them in the spring or summer. So we kind of take over them in maybe April, and so we were in the middle of June, I guess, and about 5 or 6 weeks out from training camp, and the field was starting to scalp and just wasn't really where we wanted it. So we dropped the height down to a 1/2 inch and mowed it like 5 directions, just scalped the crap out of it, and then came behind that and sprayed some Primo to just, prevent some of the shoot growth and slow it down a little bit and try to get it to a height that basically make it grow where we want it to grow. right? So we went from a 1/2 inch up to 9/16, which doesn't sound like it should make much of a difference, but it makes a pretty big difference. So we went to 9/16 and then just kept it under primo every 2 weeks for the next 6 weeks. We had 3 to 4 apps go out before training camp. And we ended up, as we got into the week of camp, I kind of got this from, there's a superintendent named Paul Atshaw that he did like 18 majors. He was the superintendent at Augusta National. He was superintendent at Congressional, Winged Foot, pretty illustrious career. And they asked him one time how he got his rough so thick. And he said, basically for a year before he would host an open, he would keep the rough mode at 1 inch and just keep it fertilized. You have to mow it all the time, but he would just keep it tight for a year. And then right before they got to it, he'd bring it up to 6 inches and it'd be thick as can be. So I kind of took that story and, we kept everything super tight. And then right before they got to camp, we brought the height up to 3/4. And it was incredible the way that it played. And so we kind of took that knowledge and then brought that back to Arrowhead of kind of how we maintain our fields there. We try to keep things as tight as we can through the summer and just keep the normal FERT apps going out. But people ask me all the time, what rate should I go? And I'm like, it depends on how you fertilize. I can't tell you, I can't see how your field is growing. I can't see it. So I don't really know what rate to tell you. We start 3 ounces an acre, and then 7 days later we go another 3, or sometimes we'll go 3 and then 7 days later go 6. And then after that we'll go every 2 weeks at 6. 6 is the rate that really works well for us with Northbridge and the way that we fertilize. So we go 6 ounces every 2 weeks. And then as we get in season, just depending on what weather's doing, we may drop that from 6 to 5 to 4. I mean, right now we're still going, 2.5 ounces of primo, even on ryegrass. So we'll go as long as we've got growth. We'll keep throwing it. The rate just may keep going down.
Gotcha. Now I'm curious. We talked to Nicole Sherry from the Baltimore Orioles last week. We heard a little bit from her, and then earlier on from Leah Withrow, and she's in a minor league baseball stadium. But about the players and their feedback on mostly the clay for them, like the infielders. But do you get much feedback from the players, and does that go into what you're doing, or do you even ask, or do they bother? What's the story with that?
In the NFL, it's really no news is good news. If you hear feedback, it's probably because it played slick or someone didn't like it. Obviously you're really looking at. I'm not looking for feedback. You want it to be good every week, and in that for us, it's if no one said anything, then it must have played well.
No, that makes sense. I think that's Nicole. Her impression was more like, she felt like a lot of the players can be babies sometimes, and so she tried not to pander too much to each of their individual needs or requests, just try to make it good overall. But with football, I'm sure everybody's playing on the same surface, and so it's not like somebody's on the grass and somebody's on the clay or whatever. Yeah,
the only time you really hear anything is if it plays slick at all. If you got players slipping, and sometimes that's a cleat issue. A guy didn't want to wear 7 studs. You've had rain, whatever. Or night games are pretty tough too, because we had a night game a couple years ago where it hit 55 degrees during the day, sunny, and then it's going to drop to 35. Well, you're going to have condensation. There's no way you're not going to have it. So when you're overseeded, ryegrass tends to play a little slicker once it gets wet. And, those type games, there's only not a whole lot you can do. You can try to throw a top dress the week of the game and see if maybe that'll help. But then you can also play loose with that as well.
Gotcha. But then I guess, Travis, just as far as, further conversation, do you have any specific stories? What's your favorite story of being the Kansas City Heads groundskeeper, as far as something that happened in a game that you felt like you could take some credit for, or I don't know, anything along those lines?
I don't know if I really have any major stories of it. Your hardest days are the all-night snow removals. There's times that we may work 24 to 36 hours straight of trying to get snow out, into a game. Those are long days, long nights, cold. And, it's one that there's plenty of stories that can probably be told just from those, of equipment breaking down or, things that are said. I'm not I'd have to say most of my stories aren't for this audience.
I gotcha. Here, you got to get loosened up a little bit for some of those, huh? But that I've seen a couple of videos from some other guys who I think both are at the Steelers now, and they're talking about removing snow. That's a big one for them too, because that's a huge job. Which I guess you're trucking it out and just dumping it. I don't even know where, because you can't dump it in the park.
The way that we do it is, we only have one tunnel. There's only one way in and one way out of Arrowhead, and which obviously makes it difficult traffic-wise and just from an efficiency standpoint. So we have some dump trailers that are 10 foot by 8 foot dump trailers, and we back those up to the wall, and we have chutes that we put all the snow into, and everything basically comes to the field. So then we haul the trailers up the tunnel, dump them in the parking lot as soon as we get out of the tunnel, and then we have huge skid loaders or tire loaders up there filling dump trucks, and they do all that from the parking lot. So we're obviously trying to keep as little traffic as possible on the playing surface. So you're trying to stay behind goalposts, you're trying to stay as close to the sidelines as you can to get in and out. Obviously the mouth of the tunnel gets hammered. One year we had snow removal and we took the tarp off and the white border line was gone. So I actually had to call baseball, and security had to open the gate for me to go over and get their baseline painter so I could paint the white border, an hour before kickoff. So that was a pretty wild one. We'd never really had anything like that happen. We really never needed. Well, we had aerosol, but we really didn't have the machine to do the lines because there's just really no reason for us to. We have one now after that day, but it was pretty wild to just take the tarp off and there's no white border on the east end zone.
But a little bit of a scare, I guess, huh? I do have one question here in the chat in the written part, which everybody, by the way, it's called Live Turf Talk. If you go into the Live Turf Talk section, you can write in there a question. I can see it and then ask Travis. But someone wants to know, more about incorporating the chewings fescue with the perennial rye and what went into that decision, I guess, instead of just rye only and doing more of it, or...
We have some pretty major shade issues at Arrowhead. The press box on the south side, the stadium's, the field itself is probably 35 feet underground from street level. So between that and the height of the stadium and the press box being built on the south side, today we only had sun on the stadium field from probably 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., So as we get later and later in the year, obviously it's difficult to grow grass with no light. And so the chewings really came from the shade tolerance and just trying to find anything that we think could grow in a cold, shady climate. So our ryegrass mix we use is from Seed Research Oregon, and it's a 80-20 Champion Fine mix. It's a 80-20 rye to chewings, and then we also get some straight chewings that we'll incorporate in at certain times, or maybe we just seed border to border. You don't want to waste it on sidelines or super high traffic areas that are just going to die. So, and then this year we're trying tetraploid rye that has a little bit bigger blade, a little bit deeper crown, but it will germinate in colder soil temps. So the jury's still out there at this point. We're real early into using it, just a couple weeks in, and obviously when you have a whole blend out there at this point, you don't really know which one's doing what. All you care about is that you have some grass. But as we get into the colder temps, I'll start going a little bit more straight tetraploid and see what we get out of it.
Gotcha. Experimenting a little bit with it, but that's crazy that the actual field is so far down there. And then you mentioned, like even this week, you have to grow lights out. Are you using those earlier in the season, the beginning of the season, you have to pull those out, or you don't? They pretty much don't need them until more.
We get pretty good light up until around the end of October. We do well enough to continue growing grass. I mean, really, the grass kind of tells you when it needs it. As you start to get weaker and areas that were good start to struggle, it's time to get the grow lights out. So usually it's about the last week of October we fire those up. But we turn our field heat on, basically as soon as the season starts. just in case we get a cold spell. We're not overseeding until end of September, 1st of October, but we'll set the field heat at 75 degrees starting in September. And if it kicks on, neat. If it doesn't kick on, then obviously it didn't need to be kicked on. So we just set it and leave it, other than sometimes as we get, last year I think it was, we set the field heat at 80 in December and put grow covers on, had grow lights out, and we're trying to obviously force grass to grow in an environment that it doesn't want to grow in. And so a lot of it's a trial and error. You're picking a number and you're hoping that it works. So the year before it worked really well. We set it at 80. We had highs in the 40s and got a pretty good amount of grass to germinate and grow in a 10-day span. So we tried it again last year. And then at the end of that window, like the last day, we hit like 60. And we went to take the grow covers off, and we had Pythium everywhere down the down the south side of the field, all the way down the home sideline. We had Pythium like 5 feet out from the border all the way down. And it was one, as a groundskeeper, you're looking at like, that really sucks. And then at the same time, that's pretty cool that we could make Pythium in December in Kansas City. So we learned our lesson off that. So now, like in this scenario where we left the grow covers on for 6 days, I turned the field heat down to 70, just so it can't maintain that 69, 70 degree soil temp, through the night.
Wow. So you're keeping Bermuda growing pretty well, like all the way through with the heat.
I don't know if I'd say growing well. It's
right.
It's green and it's there. It's still a good base, and if you get a few warm days, like in the stretch we just had, we had a little bit of Bermuda try to heal. It's definitely not moving like it moves in September. You give us 14 days in September, I feel like we can probably get that thing to where you can't find a divot. But, in this scenario, you're just hoping to keep the Bermuda green and moving at least enough to still provide a good base and good structure, good footing.
Man, yeah. No, that's, like I said, I don't think very many people realize what all goes into that. Did Jay Laveau... Oh, go for it.
I mean, most people... Look, this is kind of a niche industry, and people don't know because they've never maintained grass. Any turf manager knows the work that goes into making a field good. Other than that, the only thing people really have to use as a benchmark is their yard. And so you don't have the same traffic in your yard, and you sure don't have the same tools that we have in your yard. So really we're in a position that we're trying to manipulate Mother Nature. You're trying to beat Mother Nature, and sometimes you can try everything you can think of, and you're still not going to win. But we're always going to try.
Thanks, Jordan. How you doing, Spin? How you doing? Travis, pleasure to speak with you, sir. You touched a little bit on it earlier, actually, regarding the heat lamps, and you mentioned Pythium and stuff. How do you go about balancing things like fertilization and fungicides while trying to maintain the heat and, taking the snow off the field and things like that?
Fertilizer-wise, every other app for us is an organic app, and every other app is a synthetic app, just to try to make sure that we keep a good carbon base in the soil. So as we get to this time of year, really both of those go out the window, because you're just not going to get any real microbial movement and get a result. And then part of that too is when you go thick cut sod, it's not really rooted. I could probably honestly go out there right now and roll that field up. It might root a little bit over the few months we've had it, but it doesn't root like a normal thin cut or a sprigged field would root. So you just don't have, there's really, the roots aren't deep enough to get a whole lot of nutrients. So, this is more of a foliar fertilizer setup where we have full control of how much nitrogen we're putting out, which obviously we try to make sure that we put enough out that we don't get, something low end like dollar spot. We're also not lighting it up like a Christmas tree to where it can potentially get, Pythium. So really it's been trial and error, but what I've seen is with, the field heat, what it can actually hold. Those sensors are 4.5 inches down from the top. And so if you're 70 degrees, 4.5 inches down, and it's 40 degrees outside, it's pretty much impossible to maintain 70 degrees at the top. So, with Pythium, you're looking at being above 69 degrees for 24 hours. And that's, one way we've managed it. When we made it, obviously we had the field heat set at 80, and we just got to a stretch that the field could actually hold above 69 for 24 hours. So, it's little things that you learn over time of exactly. The only bad thing in this industry is you only get one spring, one summer, one fall, one winter a year. So when you do feel like you learned something, you have to wait a year to see if that hypothesis actually works. So it's taken us a couple of years to kind of get things dialed in and where we want it. But, really we're managing it. We have full control. I mean, we're managing it by knowing what our basement and our ceiling is, obviously paying attention to the forecast of what kind of weather we're going to get, and then kind of figuring out off of that what we think we can pull off.
Well, Travis, whatever you're doing, you got it dialed in. I mean, every time I watch the field, I can't even see a divot. It's you've done an awesome job, and I love how you incorporated your golf course experience and brought it to the NFL. When you talk about plant growth regulators and stuff like that, we were always scared to use that for the field to recover. And I know we've talked about that in the past, but man, it's you've got it dialed in.
Yeah, I mean, the recovery part is obviously one that you want, but the part that gets forgotten in what that philosophy always was, and I still talk to guys off and on about Primo and them saying, well, as I get the season, I come out of it. And I've had that conversation of the question is, do you want it to be able to recover faster, or do you want it to be able to take more traffic, right? And me personally, I'm not losing enough from a recovery standpoint. Maybe I'm losing 2 or 3 days. But if I can take more traffic and minimize the damage, then I don't need those 2 or 3 days to recover, if that makes sense.
No, that makes totally sense. And I mean, you opened my eyes. We had this conversation a couple of years ago, and you've opened my eyes on how Primo can actually work into our advantage. And, I'll never forget you telling me that, hey, do you want to have the recovery time, or do you want it to where you don't have to have recovery time? And that really opened my eyes to doing it. And I've been using that, doing that there in Tulsa, and everything's been 100% turnaround. I mean, on the damage and everything else. So, no, I appreciate that talk we had.
It's pretty awesome to see it with your own eyes too. Once you see it, like once it clicks and you see, you're like, oh my gosh, it's crazy. But I mean, like I said, for us, we were using it. We weren't using it like we're using it now. That was a total 100% fluke of like, basically, let's see what happens if we do this, right? I mean, obviously you're taking information. I'm taking information from Paul Etshaw and feeling like I think this will work, but you don't really know till you do it. But then once we saw how well the field played and how well it took training camp, I was just like, holy cow, that's a game changer for us, on everything that we manage.
That's super cool. No, yeah, I remember Spin telling me about that, him telling me that you told him, and yeah, he was pretty shocked by the results is from what I remember. But it is 5 o'clock, and so we don't want to hold you up too long. We know that you had about 30 minutes for us, and we really appreciate your time. Wanted to say thanks again, and we don't want to keep you too long or anything, and hopefully you guys can take care of those Cowboys this weekend. I'm rooting for you.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. The field will be ready. Other than that, players play, coaches coach. They allow me to do my job, and obviously I'm going to allow them to do theirs. So hopefully we put a beat down on the Cowboys and we move on down the road.
There you go.
Yeah, Travis, I appreciate you coming on, and hopefully we can get you on again. Maybe during the season and when the Bermuda's growing, if you have time. But,
oh yeah, I'm always up for these type talks. We'll make it work for sure.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Appreciate you guys.
Have a good one.
Thank you.